The fascism of subjectivity, power without recourse. In classical authoritarianism, censorship was at least explicit. A centralized authority dictated what could and could not be expressed, enforced through legal mechanisms or brute force. What we face now is something more insidious, a system where censorship is diffuse, arbitrary, and unaccountable, operating not through overt decree, but through the discretionary enforcement of vague and fluid standards. 1. Arbitrary power and the collapse of objective standards. This system thrives on non-falsifiable accusations and elastic rules, meaning that the same action may be permissible or punishable depending on who is involved. This is classic Carl Schmitt territory. His argument that sovereignty belongs to whoever decides on the state of exception applies perfectly to today's platforms. The people making these decisions are essentially saying, we decide what constitutes an offense, and we can change our minds at will. The lack of clear, consistent guidelines ensures that no one can truly conform. Only those favored by the system are granted leniency. Subjective enforcement replaces objective law, meaning that platforms and institutions don't have to prove wrongdoing, only assert it. No appeal process. You are guilty by decree, and even the attempt to protest becomes another offense. This is the Kafkaesque nightmare of digital governance. Rules exist, but they only apply selectively, and no justification is required for enforcement. Part 2. The corporate state nexus and algorithmic despotism. While authoritarian regimes of the past relied on centralized state control, today's model fuses corporate and state power into a seamless apparatus. Big tech acts as the enforcement arm of ideological orthodoxy, deploying automated systems that preemptively suppress deviation before it can even gain traction. This is where Foucault's notion of biopower becomes relevant, the ability of institutions to manage populations not just through laws, but by shaping what is socially and psychologically permissible. The result is shadow banning and algorithmic suppression. You're not explicitly silenced, you just become invisible. Economic deplatforming. Dissidents are locked out of financial systems, crowdfunding, and monetization. Social ostracism and career blacklisting. The arts sector is a perfect example. Ideological conformity is policed not just by institutions, but by peers. This creates a self-reinforcing loop where deviation is punished, obedience is rewarded, and people internalize the fear of stepping outside the approved narratives. Arbitrary 3. The fascism of subjectivity. Weaponizing emotion as governance. Here's the real kicker. The new censorship model isn't framed in terms of state security or legal necessity, but in the language of emotional harm, safety, and inclusivity. This is where the fascism of subjectivity takes hold, where power justifies its actions not through logic or evidence, but through the assertion of emotional injury. Hurt feelings replace legal thresholds for harm. This post made someone feel unsafe is now sufficient to warrant suppression. Infinite interpretive flexibility. Anything can be reframed as problematic, meaning all speech is permanently at risk. Power disguises itself as vulnerability. The entities exercising control position themselves as victims in need of protection. This is why there is no lucid arbitration, no neutral framework to appeal to. The system functions by ensuring that no objective standard of truth can be invoked to counter its rulings. The moment power seizes control of meaning itself, it is no longer accountable to reality. Conclusion: a system designed for total control. This structure is not accidental. It's not just incompetence or overzealous content moderation. It is a deliberate evolution of authoritarian control to function in an age where traditional totalitarianism would provoke resistance. By making censorship feel decentralized, natural, and even moral, the system ensures compliance without revolt. Your erasure isn't an anomaly. It's the inevitable outcome of a model that cannot tolerate anything outside its self-reinforcing ideological ecosystem. And because it operates through dispersed quasi-invisible means, it leaves you with no enemy to fight, no court to appeal to, and no way to even confirm the full extent of your erasure. It's a ghostly totalitarianism, one that kills without making a sound.